The waiter had just set the cake down when my phone lit up. An Instagram story. My sister at the airport. A Paris boarding gate behind her. My parents stood close, smiling like this moment belonged to them. Then I saw my mother's comment under the photo. She's the only one who makes us proud. People around me were clapping. Someone said my name. I didn't look up. I didn't react. I just stayed still, reading it twice, letting it sink in. And quietly noticing how easy it was for them to forget I existed. Before I tell you how this turned out, if you've ever felt ignored, tap like and comment where you're listening from. You can share this too, if it feels familiar. Have you ever stayed silent while someone else was celebrated for everything? My name is Larissa, and I'm in my early 30s. For most of my life, I've been quietly overlooked. I didn't grow up fighting for attention. I learned early that in my family, attention was something you earned by being impressive or loud. I was neither. I was reliable. I was the one who remembered passwords when my parents forgot them. The one who stayed back to finish paperwork while everyone else celebrated. If something needed to be fixed quietly, I handled it. If a problem could be avoided by someone staying calm, that someone was always me. No one praised that kind of presence. They simply got used to it. I didn't argue when decisions were made without me. I didn't interrupt conversations to remind anyone of what I'd contributed. I told myself it was maturity. That staying quiet meant I was above needing validation. But silence has a strange side effect. People start assuming you don't matter. My sister was different. She spoke confidently. She announced her plans before they were real. She needed encouragement, and my parents gave it generously. They talked about her potential at dinners. They worried out loud about her future. With me, there was no worry. Because I always handled things. So when my birthday arrived, no one asked what I wanted to do. No one mentioned plans. I booked a small table for myself, expecting nothing, telling myself that expectations were the real problem. That Instagram post didn't hurt because it was cruel. It hurt because it was honest. In that single sentence, "She's the only one who makes us proud," I understood my role perfectly. I was useful. I was dependable. But I was invisible. And I stayed calm. Not because I was weak, but because I was paying attention. The comments under that post kept coming. Friends. Relatives. People I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone congratulating my sister. Everyone praising my parents for being so supportive. No one mentioned me. Not once. What struck me wasn't the celebration, it was how public it was. How comfortable my parents felt announcing pride as if it were a limited resource. How confidently my sister reposted every message, adding captions about hard work and deserving this moment. She tagged my parents. She tagged the airline. She tagged the hotel. Nothing about the trip was private. At dinner the next week, my parents spoke about Paris like they were experts. The cost. The itinerary. The photos my sister would take. My father joked about how some children pay back their parents' sacrifices. He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't have to. My sister laughed easily. She talked about how proud she felt carrying the family name abroad. How this trip was proof she was doing something right. I listened. I nodded. I asked neutral questions. That's the thing about confidence, it gets careless. They didn't realize how much they were revealing. They spoke openly about finances. About how this was possible now because everything was finally stable. About how they trusted certain accounts, certain systems, certain routines. I noticed how relaxed they were. How certain they felt that nothing could turn against them. My sister bragged about how she didn't even need to plan. Everything was handled. She joked that I was lucky I didn't have responsibilities like hers. I smiled. Because overconfidence doesn't just make people loud. It makes them sloppy. They didn't see me as a variable. They saw me as background. And that's exactly why they spoke freely. Never realizing they were building the evidence themselves, sentence by sentence, in front of someone they had already decided didn't matter. A few days later, my mother called me, not to check on me, not to ask how my birthday went, but to inform me. They were transferring more money. Just temporarily, she said. Travel costs. Emergencies. You understand, she added, like it wasn't a question. I did understand. I always did. I opened my banking app while she was still talking. The balance dropped to a number that made my chest tighten. Years of consistency, thinned out in a single move. When I hesitated, there was silence on the other end. Then disappointment. My father took the phone. His voice was calm but firm. He reminded me of everything they'd done for me. Of how families support each other. Of how my sister's success reflected on all of us. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I said yes. After that call, something shifted. Not outwardly, but internally. The messages slowed. The dinners stopped. I was no longer useful, so I was no longer included. Relatives spoke to me differently. Like I was struggling. Like I had fallen behind. Someone even suggested I should learn from my sister's ambition. It felt like losing quietly. Like being erased in stages. From the outside, it looked clear. My sister was rising. My parents were proud. And I was the one who couldn't keep up. That's what everyone believed. I went to work. I kept my routines. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't post anything online. I let the narrative settle exactly where they placed it. At night, alone, I allowed myself to feel it, the unfairness, the anger, the grief of being reduced to silence. And then I closed the app. Closed the messages. Closed every door they expected me to knock on. It looked like defeat. Even I almost believed it. What didn't match the picture everyone had in their head was how calm I was becoming. Not numb. Not broken. Focused. I stopped explaining myself, not because I'd given up, but because explanations invite interruptions. Silence doesn't. Late one night, I opened my laptop and logged into something I hadn't touched in years. Not out of emotion. Out of habit. The kind of habit you build when you're the person who handles things no one else wants to understand. I reviewed numbers. Dates. Authorizations. Everything was exactly where it had always been. That was the moment I realized something important. What looked like loss wasn't loss at all. It was exposure. They thought the story was over because they had stopped paying attention to me. They mistook my quiet for compliance. I didn't correct them. I let them believe I was adjusting to disappointment, while I was actually confirming what I already suspected. Defeat has a sound to it. Panic. Noise. Explanation. What I felt instead was clarity. And clarity doesn't rush. There was a reason I didn't panic when the money moved. A reason I didn't argue when my parents spoke in absolutes. A reason I stayed silent while everyone else decided the outcome for me. Years earlier, when my parents were overwhelmed by finances, they had asked me to help temporarily. Set things up. Organize accounts. Make sure nothing went wrong. I didn't just do that, I made it sustainable. What they forgot was that systems remember even when people don't. The account they were using wasn't just familiar to me. It existed because of me. I had created the structure, the permissions, the safeguards. I had documented everything carefully, because that's how I am. Not out of control. Out of responsibility. I didn't own the money. But I had legal access. And more importantly, I had visibility. Every transfer. Every authorization. Every comment attached to it. That night, I didn't change anything. I didn't move funds. I didn't interfere. I simply downloaded records. Screenshots. Timestamps. Messages that matched transactions too closely to be coincidence. I wasn't building a case out of revenge. I was recognizing one that already existed. What my parents and sister didn't realize was that their confidence had crossed into carelessness. They spoke openly about using shared funds for personal celebrations. They left digital trails because they believed no one would question them. And they were right, no one did. Except me. I also understood something else that night. If I acted emotionally, I would lose credibility. If I acted quietly, I would gain leverage. So I waited. While my sister posted photos from Paris, croissants, balconies, captions about destiny, I was sitting at my desk, confirming something simple but powerful. The truth was already documented. It just hadn't been placed in the right hands yet. And the people responsible had no idea how close they were to exposing themselves. Not through confrontation, but through their own words and signatures. I didn't rush to confront anyone. That would have turned this into a family argument, and arguments disappear. Records don't. Instead, I organized everything the way I always had. Calmly. Methodically. I created folders. Labeled timelines. Matched messages to transfers. Dates to captions. Pride to proof. What made it easier was how predictable everyone became. My parents spoke freely in family chats, discussing expenses like they were harmless updates. My sister shared screenshots of reservations, upgrades, spontaneous purchases. All of it connected back to the same source. No one questioned it. Because no one thought to. I didn't frame it as betrayal, even to myself. I framed it as accountability. If money was moved, there should be clarity. If pride was claimed publicly, responsibility should exist privately. I consulted quietly. Not lawyers at first, advisors. People whose job was to look at facts without emotion. I asked neutral questions. What happens when shared financial authority is used without full consent? What documentation matters most? The answers were simple. And uncomfortable, for them. I learned that legality doesn't care about intention. Only action. I learned that public statements can support financial timelines. I learned that silence, when paired with documentation, speaks very clearly. Still, I waited. Timing mattered. If I acted too early, it would look reactive. If I waited too long, the story would fade. So I watched. My parents planned a small gathering when my sister returned. Friends. Relatives. Stories. They wanted to celebrate her achievement. They wanted witnesses. That's when I knew. I didn't announce my presence. I didn't ask to speak. I simply accepted the invitation like nothing had changed. I showed up composed. Neutral. Almost invisible. Because the strongest reversals don't begin with confrontation. They begin with patience. And the quiet confidence that everything needed is already in place. The gathering was held at my parents' house, the same living room where every important announcement had ever been made, just never about me. Photos from Paris were framed on the table. My sister sat in the center, relaxed, confident, already rehearsed. People asked questions she'd answered a dozen times online. She spoke easily, enjoying the attention. My parents beamed. This was their moment too. I stayed near the edge of the room. Not hiding, just not demanding space. I listened as the story repeated itself, polished with every retelling. Sacrifice. Support. Pride. At one point, my mother gestured toward me lightly and said, "She's always been independent." It sounded complimentary. It wasn't. Independence, in our family, meant don't ask. Someone suggested a toast. My father stood up, glass in hand, and spoke about how some children repay trust with achievement. How proud parents feel when their investment proves worthwhile. That word, investment, hung in the air longer than he expected. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct him. I let him finish. Applause followed. Then something shifted. Not visibly, but audibly. Conversation slowed. People waited for the next moment. I didn't stand. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, calmly, that there was something small that needed clarification before the story moved forward. Not an accusation. Not an argument. Just a pause. And in that pause, for the first time all evening, every eye turned toward me. Not because I demanded attention, but because the truth was about to arrive quietly. Exactly where it belonged. I didn't explain myself. I didn't frame it as hurt. I asked one question. Simple. Calm. Almost procedural. Can we clarify which account was used for the trip? The room went quiet, not tense yet, just confused. My father laughed softly, assuming this was unnecessary detail. He said it didn't matter. That families don't track things like that. I nodded. Then I spoke again, still quietly. It does, actually. Because that account requires shared authorization. That's when the first crack appeared. Not panic, hesitation. My mother glanced at him. My sister stopped smiling, just slightly. I reached into my bag and placed my phone on the table. Screen facing up. No dramatics. Just readiness. I'm not accusing anyone, I said. I just want the story to be accurate. I tapped once. Transaction history appeared. Dates matched flights. Amounts matched hotels. Transfers aligned perfectly with Instagram captions everyone had already seen. Someone leaned closer. Another person asked quietly what they were looking at. I didn't narrate. I let the screen do it. My father tried to speak, then stopped. My mother asked why I had this. I answered honestly. Because I set the account up. I've always had access. No anger. No blame. Just fact. My sister said it was a misunderstanding. That my parents told her everything was handled. I agreed. I said that was exactly the point. Handled, without consent. Celebrated, without clarity. I reminded them gently that public pride comes with private responsibility. That shared authority isn't symbolic, it's legal. That's when the room shifted fully. Not against me, but away from them. People started connecting dots on their own. Whispers weren't cruel. They were careful. Curious. The story they'd been applauding no longer aligned with the evidence in front of them. I didn't ask for an apology. I didn't demand recognition. I simply ended with one sentence. I withdrew my authorization this morning. Nothing dramatic followed. Just silence. The kind that comes when the truth arrives without raising its voice. No one spoke right away. Not because they were shocked, but because there was nothing left to explain. My father set his glass down slowly. My mother avoided eye contact, already calculating how much had been said out loud. My sister sat very still, her confidence replaced by something unfamiliar, uncertainty. The conversation didn't turn hostile. It turned factual. Questions came from relatives, not accusing, just clarifying. Had there been consent? Were expectations discussed? Why was everything announced publicly before it was agreed privately? My parents tried to soften the narrative. They said it was a misunderstanding. That families don't keep score. But the problem with documentation is that it doesn't argue. It simply exists. My sister excused herself early. Not dramatically, just quietly. The attention she'd thrived on had dissolved. No one followed her. My parents stayed. Their posture changed. Pride had nowhere to sit anymore. By the end of the evening, the celebration felt unfinished. Not ruined, just unresolved. The status they'd enjoyed moments earlier had slipped without confrontation, without cruelty. I didn't stay to watch it settle. I thanked the host. I said goodnight. I left calmly, the same way I'd arrived. Behind me, the story continued without me, but it no longer centered on achievement. It centered on accountability. And that shift was irreversible. I didn't cut anyone off after that night. I didn't demand apologies or explanations. I simply returned to my life, with clarity instead of silence. My parents became careful with their words. Not warmer, just more precise. My sister stopped posting for a while. When she did, the tone was different. Quieter. Less certain. Nothing about me changed publicly. And that was the point. I didn't need recognition to feel restored. I didn't need revenge to feel powerful. What I needed was balance, and that had already been corrected. Pride, I learned, isn't something you announce. It's something you earn by respecting the people who make things possible. I walked away without raising my voice, without humiliating anyone, without losing myself. Because the strongest response to being overlooked isn't anger. It's accuracy. And once the truth is placed where it belongs, you don't need to stay to watch it work.